The year 1347, a year that would be etched into the annals of history for its unparalleled devastation. A shadow crept across Europe, not of any cloud or earthly creature, but of death itself, an invisible force that would change the course of history. From the bustling ports of Italy, a silent terror spread, carried on the very air we breathe, infiltrating every corner of society. The Black Death, they would come to call it, a name whispered with dread and fear, a name that would haunt generations. Imagine a world where the stench of death permeates the air, where the cries of the sick and dying echo through empty streets, a world turned upside down, the joyous bustle of medieval life silenced, the vibrant energy of towns and cities replaced by an eerie stillness. Markets, once teeming with merchants and their wares, stood deserted, the only trade now in fear and despair. The once lively exchanges of goods and stories, now replaced by a haunting quiet. The laughter of children, once a familiar melody, was replaced by a chilling silence. Playgrounds and streets, once filled with joy, now lay abandoned. The Black Death, indiscriminate in its reach, spared no one. It swept through villages and cities alike, leaving a trail of sorrow and loss. Rich and poor alike dragged into the abyss. Nobles and peasants, merchants and beggars, all found themselves equal in the face of this relentless plague. Families were torn apart, communities shattered. The very fabric of society was tested as the plague showed no mercy. Efforts to combat the plague were often in vain. Medieval doctors, with their limited knowledge, could do little to stem the tide of death. Prayers and quarantines became the desperate measures of a world in crisis. Yet, in the face of such overwhelming darkness, humanity's resilience began to shine through. Slowly, towns and villages started to rebuild, and life, though forever changed, began to find its way back. Whispers spoke of ships arriving from the east, laden not with silks and spices, but with a cargo far more sinister. These vessels, once symbols of prosperity and adventure, now heralded a dark omen. The bustling ports, usually filled with the sounds of trade and laughter, were now overshadowed by an eerie silence, as the spectre of death loomed large. The Black Death, it is believed, began its reign of terror in the rodent-infested plains of Asia, carried westward along the Silk Road, a path of commerce transformed into a highway of pestilence. Traders, unaware of the deadly cargo they carried, moved along this ancient route, spreading the plague with every step. The once thriving Silk Road, a symbol of cultural exchange and economic prosperity, became a conduit for death and despair. Fleas, those tiny creatures, unseen hitchhikers on rats aboard merchant vessels, became harbingers of doom. These minuscule parasites, often overlooked, played a pivotal role in the spread of the plague. As they fed on the blood of infected rodents, they became carriers of the deadly bacteria, ready to transmit it to their next host. Their bite, a death sentence, injecting the plague into the very lifeblood of Europe. The infected, unaware of the source of their suffering, succumbed to the disease in droves. The once vibrant towns and cities were transformed into ghostly landscapes, filled with the cries of the dying and the stench of decay. From the bustling trade routes of Constantinople, the plague found its way to the shores of Italy, carried on the breath of the wind and in the holds of unsuspecting ships. The disease spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The ports, once gateways to the world, became entry points for the relentless march of death. The east wind, once a promise of exotic goods and far-off lands, now carried the stench of death. The very air seemed to be tainted, as if nature itself had turned against humanity. The dreams of adventure and discovery were replaced by nightmares of suffering and loss. as the plague continued its relentless advance, leaving no corner of Europe untouched. Like wildfire in a dry forest, the Black Death swept across Europe, leaving a trail of unimaginable horror and destruction in its wake. From Italy, it spread north, relentlessly devouring everything in its path. The bustling ports and thriving cities became the gateways for this relentless scourge. France, Spain, the Low Countries, none were spared its touch. The plague showed no mercy, sweeping through towns and villages, leaving desolation in its wake. Within a few short years, the Black Death had claimed millions of lives, leaving a trail of devastation and despair in its wake. Entire communities were wiped out, and the social fabric of Europe was forever altered. Imagine, if you will, the terror that gripped the hearts of men as they watched their loved ones succumb to this unseen enemy. The fear was palpable, a constant companion in every household, the fear that lingered in the air, as palpable as the stench of decay. It was a time when hope seemed lost, and the future was shrouded in uncertainty. Villages, once vibrant centers of life, transformed into ghost towns, their streets littered with the bodies of the dead and dying. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the once lively chatter of daily life. The living, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the disaster, were left to bury their dead in mass graves, a grim testament to the plague's devastating power. These mass burials became a common sight, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the relentless march of death. Desperate attempts were made to understand and combat the plague, but medieval medicine was ill-equipped to deal with such a catastrophe. The doctors, with their beaked masks and primitive tools, could do little to stem the tide of death. In their desperation, people turned to religion, hoping for divine intervention. Processions and prayers filled the streets, but the plague continued its relentless march, indifferent to the pleas of the faithful. The Black Death left an indelible mark on the culture and psyche of Europe. Art and literature of the time were filled with macabre imagery, reflecting the pervasive sense of doom and the ever-present spectre of death. In the summer of 1348, the plague reached the shores of England, a land already grappling with famine and hardship. From the southern ports, it spread like a stain, reaching London by the autumn. The city, densely populated and rife with the filth that bred disease, became a breeding ground for the pestilence. Imagine the River Thames, its waters choked with the bodies of the dead, a gruesome reflection of the city's fate. The cries of the dying, a constant reminder of the invisible enemy stalking the streets. York, Norwich, Bristol, all fell victim to the plague's relentless advance. No corner of England was spared. From the bustling cities to the remote villages, the Black Death claimed its victims with terrifying impartiality. Section 5. A World Decimated. Counting the Lost Souls. The Black Death's toll was staggering. Across Europe, it is estimated that between 75 and 200 million souls perished. In England, some estimates suggest that as much as half the population was wiped out in a few short years. Imagine, if you will, the impact of such loss. Entire villages wiped off the map, families decimated, their lineage extinguished. The very fabric of society torn asunder. The numbers, though difficult to comprehend, paint a chilling picture of the Black Death's destructive power. A world reeling from the loss of so many lives, forever scarred by the experience. Section 6. Marked by death, the signs of the pestilence. The Black Death, a merciless killer, announced its presence with terrifying symptoms. Swollen lymph nodes, known as buboes, erupted on the body, grotesquely disfigured and oozing pus. Fever raged, chills racked the body, and death, a merciful release, often came within days. Imagine the terror of watching these symptoms appear on your loved ones, knowing that their fate was sealed. The despair of being unable to offer any comfort. any cure. The pestilence carried by fleas and spread through the air knew no boundaries. The stench of death, a constant reminder of the invisible enemy lurking in their midst. Section 7. Unholy Chaos. Society crumbles. The Black Death's impact extended far beyond the physical toll it took on Europe's population. The social, economic, and religious landscape of the medieval world was irrevocably altered. Fear and panic, rampant, eroded the very foundations of society. Imagine the breakdown of social order as people turned on each other, desperate to escape the plague's grasp. The collapse of trade, as fear kept merchants from plying their wares. Religious faith, once a source of comfort, was shaken to its core. Many questioned the existence of a benevolent God, while others sought solace in radical forms of piety, desperate to appease a seemingly wrathful deity. Section 8. Scars on the Soul. The Plague's Legacy. The Black Death, though a distant echo in the annals of history, left an indelible mark on the world. Its legacy, a tapestry woven from death, despair, and ultimately, resilience. The plague's impact can be seen in the art, literature, and even the very DNA of those who survived its ravages. Imagine a world forever changed, haunted by the memory of mass death. A world where the fragility of life is forever etched in the collective consciousness. The Black Death, a stark reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of human existence. Its story, a cautionary tale, echoing through the ages, urging us to remember the lessons learned from this dark chapter in human history.